Are you a nerd? That's okay. This is a safe space for all of us nerds to rejoice in all of our nerdiness and talk about the magical, the mythical, and the macabre. And today we are here to talk about a creature that has piqued my interest recently. And I saw it when I watched the first season of The Witcher. And before season 2 came out, I had rewatched season 1. And I noticed this creature that Geralt fights in the beginning of the series, and I thought to myself, like, what actually is that? And so I did a bunch of digging around and a bunch of research, and I find that the creature that Geralt fights in the beginning of the show is called a Kikimora. As you may know, creatures in the media that we watch are typically based off of a folklore or a mythology that was passed down through centuries and generations. I found out what the Kikimora actually is and figured out that it's pretty different from the Kikimora in the games and the show. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. And by the end of the video, we're going to talk about the origin of the Kikimora and the way it correlates with the Witcher show and the game. So in the show, the first thing that we encounter is this giant spider-like creature that emerges from the swamp, and right off the bat we see Geralt come and viciously slay this creature. The Kikimora, I believe, serves 3 purposes to The Witcher. First, what it does is it showcases Geralt's very skillful monster hunting abilities. Second is that it shows the audience the grandiose of the creatures that are yet to come within the Winter series. The third, and I think the most important reason for the Kikimora, is that the Kikimora actually serves as a catalyst for the entire series. The reason why I say this is because you see Geralt fight this creature. He throws the Kikimora on the back of Roach, his trusty steed, and he heads over to the town of Blaviken. And when he gets to Blaviken, it's very apparent that nobody wants him there. They're kind of just like, peace out, bye, you're pretty much the scum of the earth. For this one girl named Marilka, and Marilka is actually a pretty interesting character to me, at least, even though she's there for like seconds of the show. She is this little girl in Blaviken who is something bigger, and she sees Geralt and doesn't see him as a monster, but 1, sees him as an opportunity, and 2, sees him as a person of a grand adventure and mystery. She immediately strikes up conversation with him. Not only that, is she thinks that there's someone who might be interested in the Kikimora that Geralt has acquired, because we all know that what Geralt is after is the coin. After being introduced to this wizard, we come to find that this man's name is Stregobor. And Stregobor has a very interesting proposition for Geralt, where he wants him to assassinate a woman named Renfri. And what we come to find out is that Renfri is one of 60 girls that were born under the Black Sun. And this introduces the curse of the Black Sun, where a mage named Eltabod basically prophesizes that these women were going to grow up and become vicious monsters, bring back the reign of the goddess Lilith, and thus basically destroying all of human civilization. So I don't really blame Stregobor for wanting to assassinate Renfri, because if you think this is for the betterment of society, you probably wouldn't do that. It's kind of like picking the greater good over the one kind of concept. But at the same time, should we save humanity? Just a thought. But anyways, Geralt and Renfri had already seen each other at the cavern that Geralt went into to try to acquire the bounty for the Kikimora. So when he goes up to her, he doesn't automatically go to assassinate her. They kind of just strike up a conversation, and we come to just find that Renfri and Geralt are fairly similar in that they're both deemed by as monsters by most people. They're pretty much just people that are living their life. They have these circumstances that were brought upon them, and they're kind of just dealing with it the way that they can. So Geralt doesn't automatically try to kill Renfri. They honestly just end up spending the day together, and upon going to bed, Geralt has this dream, and in the dream, Renfri shows up, and she introduces the girl in the woods, and says that this girl is his destiny, and he is bound by this destiny. And moments later, we come to find that this destiny is Ciri. That's why I think that the Kikimora is actually a very important aspect to the show, because it pretty much jumpstarts the plot of the series. In the games, however, the Kikimora are fairly different. They're still insects, but they're much smaller, and they tend to have horned heads and torsos with thorny, spiky legs. And they live in colonies that are curated by the queen, protected by the warriors, and held together by the workers. You can find them in the game in wetlands, near bodies of water, and in suburban areas during the rainy seasons. Their colonies tend to be in dark, damp caves, and you know you're coming across a Kikimora colony when it's devoid of all animal and human life, and there are bones littered about the entire area, usually picked clean by the warriors. They have deadly leaping strikes, and they spit acid at you that causes blindness and crippling pain. Workers are naturally the smallest of the three. They tend to be resourceful, they're industrious, they're fairly calm, and they tend to only be aggressive when provoked. They are less armored than the rest, and they are also susceptible to knockout attempts. The warriors protect the colony and protect the queen. Dutiful and defensive, and they have thick armor. They're immune to most effects, and they're resistant to knockdown attempts. They will also command workers to dig holes for them so that the warriors can come and do sneak attacks. Their acid leaves you unable to swallow potions and cause you to suffer overdose effects such as half health and health degeneration. But these can be neutralized by equipping the alchemy skill Titan Tolerance that has to be fully upgraded. So the queen finds a dark, damp cave, and pretty much her purpose is to just chillax and pump out all these babies. She has like thick armor, and she's pretty much resistant to everything. She's bulky and has rib-like flesh protruding from her abdomen. She also has no eyes, and her only weakness is that she's slow, but she can literally kill you in one hit. And there's really no way to kill her. All you really have to do is just run like the wind. So as you can see, the game and the show have their similarities, but they're also very different. Now we're going to go into the folklore of the Kikimora, where it originated. And then in the end, we're going to see the correlation between all three of these. So the Kikimora in folklore is a Eastern Slavic domestic female spirit seen as an ugly, hunched over hag with long, disheveled hair covered by a headscarf, usually also worn by the women back in the Eastern Slavic region back in the day. She's scrawny, and she's said to be so thin that she can literally just like be yeeted by the wind. She wears unkempt and tattered clothes, probably covered in dirt, moss, and swamp water. She has bulging eyes and a long, thin nose or beak, followed by short legs with chicken feet at the end. Kikimora tend to be created during very tragic events, such as abortions, miscarriages. They'll come about when a woman dies in child labor, if a child dies and hasn't been baptized, if a child is buried underneath a house, which actually was a common practice back then, when a child dies and it was deformed during life. Elderly female spirits that have roamed the earth for too long, and interestingly enough, if a cat jumps over a newly made grave and the being rises from that grave, it will either become a Kikimora or it'll become a vampire. Kikimoras are typically said to be very hyperactive. They can become invisible upon command, And they also love to spin thread. That's one of their favorite things to do. And their favorite times to do spinning is during forbidden times, which are on Fridays at midnight and during Christmas Eve. Kikimora will either be extremely helpful to your household, or they can be extremely destructive. And if you're really on their bad side, they can even be malevolent or evil. Kikimora typically dwell in inhabited homes, entering through keyholes, and during the day will hide in crevices, basements, behind the stove, pretty much anywhere. But at night, if you hear scuttering about, rummaging through everything, if you hear clinking of pots, and if you wake up and find your knitting and sewing gear messed up, then you probably have a Kikimora in your house. They also like to inhabit creepy buildings, like cursed buildings or buildings near cemeteries. They can be found near crossroads, which in a lot of different folklore and mythology, crossroads are seen as a portal between the spiritual world and the material world. They also like to dwell in burned homes, and they'll dwell inside houses of people that have recently committed suicide. Some Kikimora, however, would rather live in forests and swamps, although they still would rather live in the creepier ones. Whereas Kikimora and their partner, the Leshy, which we will do another video about because they're actually pretty interesting, they tend to find people walking about near the forest, and they will drag them in, and then those people will never be seen again. And if you somehow find yourself in a pea field in the summer, you should probably run, because the Kikimora will chase after you with a frying pan intended to eat you. They are also sometimes known to kidnap children, and it's also said that the kidnapped children will become Kikimora themselves, and in place of kidnapping your child, they will leave either an enchanted item, or they'll leave like a mossy log or a rock in their place. Many disguise themselves as lost children, or they'll disguise themselves as animals or plants and objects that seem enticing to want to bring back into your home. Which, witches out there, I see you, because I'm one of them. I will pick up a rock if I like it. I will try to take a stray cat home if it's wandering about. But we probably should keep in mind that it could be a Kikimora in disguise. When a Kikimora is in your home, she can be persuaded to do household chores by washing your utensils in a brew of ferns, because for some reason Kikimora just really like ferns. But they will only insist competent workers, and if you're an incompetent housekeeper, you'll find things missing, your food will be spoiled fairly quickly, and you'll find your children waking up all throughout the night. When there is harmony in the home, however, she will help you clean dishes, she'll help you tend to the animals and your children, rocking them to sleep if they need to be, and if you keep her really happy, she'll even act as a guardian for your home. But if there's chaos, maybe you and your spouse are fighting, they will break dishes, they'll mess with the animals, make loud noises, they'll flip chairs and furniture, and you might find that your animals' milks are going to be kind of dried up. But if they're very upset, they will literally come to you while you sleep, sit on your chest, drain you of your life source, causing sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis can lead to signs of depression, and in some extreme cases, thoughts of suicide. Another interesting characteristic of the Kikimora is that they're fortune tellers, and they're associated with fate. If you see one sitting and lounging around the front of your house, it's very likely that bad luck or tragedy will happen. If you see her crying, that's pretty much a death omen. And if you're allowed to witness or hear her spinning thread, it means someone in your family is going to die. You can hold her ransom for her fortune-telling abilities. If you hear her child or her children crying underneath the floorboards, you find the nearest crevice, you cover it with a rag, and she would pretty much do anything you want at that point to save her child. Another funny thing about the Kikimora is that she loves spinning thread, but she's actually really, really bad at it, and that's probably one of the most relatable things I've ever heard in my entire life. Slavic women would hide their creations and hide their sewing equipment so that the Kikimora would not disturb them, and then they would also put protective spells on them for the Kikimora to not disturb their work. So to get rid of a Kikimora, you can block keyholes, block crevices for her to go through, leave a broom upside down near the door because that acts as a protective barrier against the spirit, and recite prayers and poems. You can bury silver near your entrances. You can wear protective amulets. They don't like white onions or black beads. For some reason, those two things are just like no-nos for Kikimora. They won't come in if there's Bibles and crosses laying about, and they are said to be allergic to pastors. If someone calls you a Kikimora, they're either calling you a very dirty and unmotivated person, or they're calling you someone very hardworking. So you might want to figure out what exactly they mean by that. Also, children would be called Kikimora if they were like the black sheep of the family, which most of us probably would have been called a Kikimora back in the day. So for the Kikimora being very different from the Kikimora in the show and in the games, how does this all come together? Honestly, pretty much the only thing they all have in common is that they like to live near swamps and in like really creepy places. And between the show and the folklore, she likes to spin thread, and in the show, it's a giant spider. So that's pretty much the main conclusion that I was able to come with that. So in the show, pretty much, the Kikimora is a very exaggerated version of both of them. Pretty much is Hollywood magic and the imagination of humans. I'm no cultural anthropologist by any means, but folklore mythology, they exist for a reason. So my question was, why did the Kikimora exist in the first place? So the conclusion I came up with is that the Kikimora come from tragic incidences, like the abortions and the miscarriages and all that. And these tragedies happened fairly often back then. A lot of women were dying during childbirth. A lot of children were dying very young. And because of all of these situations, there's a lot of guilt, shame, and regret that comes through after all of these events. So when you hear scurrying about at night, and when you see items are being misplaced, I can imagine that it's just our minds wanting to put an external source into our internal sufferings. Because what if the scurrying at night is just little animals like rats and mice that are waking you up at night, and then maybe you forget that you misplaced some items, and you're so distraught from these tragic happenings that your mind just is trying to rationalize this, and it picks this entity that is causing these things to happen. The sleep paralysis, the nightmares, why wouldn't you blame it on something other than our human suffering, which maybe at the time they didn't know a better way to wrap their head around it. What I've learned is that folklore and these stories are our teachers. Whether they're stories passed down to us from generations or they are as Hollywood adaptations, they offer wisdom, and it really depends on what you take from it and how you apply it to your own life, and maybe allows you to not make mistakes that other people made, and so that we can further ourselves in society. So that's why I thought that the Kikimora was a really interesting character to look into. I didn't really think much of it when I watched The Witcher the first time, but when I watched it the second time, I was really curious about what this creature was and what it meant to The Witcher and what it meant to us in our lives. That's why I wanted to make this channel, is because I want to explore and dive deep into the creatures that we see in media and that we're told about in our lives, and what they mean to us and what they mean to society. And we can talk about the fun things, we can talk about the bad things, we can talk about the important things. So if you like the concept, go ahead and hit subscribe if you would like the video if you liked learning about the Kikimora, and then comment what you would want to hear me talk about next and what you're interested in. And also, if you ever want to hang out, I stream on Twitch every Monday, and so we can go ahead and talk more about this. You can talk about anything. I play video games, I can do just chatting, and I also do ASMR. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really am excited to go on this YouTube journey with you guys and build a community, and we can rejoice in being our nerdy selves. So thank you, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day wherever you are.